Audio Unleashed.
Ask me what we're talking about.
Dennis Berger, noted audio and video and home automation journalist.
Yeah.
What we'll be talking about today on the Audio
Unleashed
podcast.
Okay, first up, we got a story from Twittering Machines, article from Michael Lavorgna. It is titled Hi-Fi Thoughts, How Much Time is Enough to Write a Meaningful Review? I think the concept explains itself here. The question is, pretty apparent. How long does a reviewer need to sit with a piece of gear before they can say something meaningful about its performance? I think you and I are going to be in pretty close agreement on this one. And I don't know if we're going to be in complete agreement with Michael. So we're going to have some interesting things to say about that both, I would think.
Yes, we will have fun with that.
What's next?
Next, we're going to talk about Tidal. Tidal, for those of you who haven't heard, is a streaming service that was owned by Jay-Z. It was started by like some dudes in Norway or somewhere, and then Jay-Z bought it, and now it's something, I don't know. But
does Jay-Z not own it anymore? I didn't realize that.
I don't know. It's very mysterious to me. But it's mysterious to me because I'm incurious. But
I was about to say the same.
Two stories about this. One from Tech Hive. Wait, are they both from Tech Hive? I think they are. One of them is talking about how Tidal is dropping the last of the MQA tracks that were on there, right? MQA being Master Quality Authenticated.
Yeah.
I can't wait till I forget that completely. Controversial technology that was derided by many and has kind of fallen away, despite the fact that we were assured that it was going to revolutionize everything. And it was going to turn the Nyquist theorem on its head.
Yeah.
But whatever. It seemed to fail to do so. And also they talked about how Tidal is no longer on Samsung TV. So we are going to talk about, what's the status of Tidal? Is this still a player? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then what are we going to talk about?
Then we've got a video from Mr. Rick Beato called The Real Reason Why Music is Getting Worse. I've seen a lot of people deriding this video on Facebook especially, and a lot of people talking in audiophile groups about how it just feels like, Rick is telling people to get off his lawn. One of the things that you said in our idea board is there's a whiff of old man yells at cloud about this, but I think he makes a lot of really good points, honestly. And I have to say, as a recent vinyl convert, a lot of what he said resonated with me in a sort of meaningful way that I'll riff on if we have time. I don't know if we will, but what do you think about it?
Well,
30,000-foot view.
All right, my 30,000-foot. I'm going to take a 50,000-foot view.
Okay.
70,000 foot. We're going up to like SR-71 level here. I think the people that are saying that Rick Beato is just a guy yelling for kids to get off his lawn are old men who are yelling at clouds.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's what I think. So doubling back on I know that's confusing, but doubling back on, I think Rick is making a lot of good points. And, really and for me as a musician, a lot of this, both as a musician and a listener, a lot of this really resonated with me. And I have things to say, which may not surprise you too much.
Never.
So, it falls to me, the honor falls to me to introduce our Patreon-only segment, which deals with, I was reading stereophile.com, noted audiophile website, and I saw this article about John Atkinson, former editor, now technical editor, was saying farewell to John Iverson, who's been their web editor since I think the late 90s, and who's retiring. And he was saying that John Iverson, aced this blind amp listening test that Stereophile did. I was kind of like, I don't remember that. And Atkinson was kind enough to put a link in there to the article. I went and read it. It's a mile long. I don't know how many pages it was. A lot of pages. And apparently they published this before I started reading Stereophile, which was in 1991.
Yeah.
And it was this big, long, giant article about blind testing of a couple of amplifiers. It was an AgCom of some sort for like $750, and then a VTL tube amp for I think about $5,000. And boy, the more I dug into this, the more I started to think it was something we should address here. And we're going to get technical with this, and we're going to get into some philosophical stuff. And we're going to talk a lot about blind testing. And we have so much to talk about here. So much. Yeah. I wish we could share it with everyone, but they can subscribe.
Yeah.
How can they subscribe to our podcast?
They can just go to Patreon and look for Audio Unleashed, and we're there. And for $3 a month, you get an extra segment every episode.
Awesome.
We'll put a link in the show notes like we always do. I think it's the first link I do every time I do show notes. So
see, we can do shameless self-promotion. We're learning how to do this. We're getting good.
Very slowly.
And subscribe, the whole schmear. Do the whole schmear.
Yeah.
What are we talking about since you're supposed to introduce this?
Twittering machines, Michael Lavorgna's site.
Michael Lavorgna's site. All right, good.
Yeah. Yeah. So he's got this new article, Hi-Fi Thoughts, How Much Time is Enough to Write a Meaningful Review? And it starts with an image, just a question like, how much time with an unfamiliar product is enough to write a meaningful review? A few minutes, a few hours, a few days, a week, a month, more than a month. And he sort of goes through his thought process, and I guess we might as well spoil it. I mean, his ultimate answer is, I need months with a product to be able to say anything meaningful about it, which I'm going to go out on a limb and guess you and I both very strongly disagree with that. I mean, I think, you and I might be different with regard to some of this, because I think you're a lot cleverer of a writer than I am. And I think you're also a little more nimble. A lot of times it takes me a while to figure out how I want to say something. Whereas I think you're much stronger at, I know what I want to say, boom, I'm going to say it, and bang, bang, bang. So I have to think about how I want to articulate a lot longer than you do. But I think you and I would both say that we come to our conclusions pretty quickly. Don't you think that's true?
Yeah, I have so much to say. But first of all, let me say, I really like Michael Lavorgna a lot. He's a cool dude. I like hanging with him. I mean, but he's got a high-end audio website, so he's got to toe the high-end audio line.
Yeah.
As so many others have. And I want to come at this from a different perspective, because there are high-end audio writers. People don't know about this, but there are high-end audio writers who are occasionally paid by some of these companies to consult for them, and they don't publicize it. There are quite a few of them. But they're generally, the company sends them the product and they say whatever they say about it, right, to the company. It's just sort of like a beta test. And the people they don't do anything fancy. They just listen to it and go, oh, whatever. And when I've been hired as a consultant, companies have brought me in almost every case. Companies have brought me in to work directly with their engineers, and they've flown me to Asia a few times to do this. And I tend to be running a lot of measurements, and in some cases I'm showing them how to do the measurements, and in some cases I'm providing a second set of measurements because they're not confident in their measurements, and all this different kind of stuff I've done. And I get involved in the nuts and bolts of it, right? In terms of the voicing on the DSP, in terms of just even the passive crossovers and all sorts of stuff, right? And I've been part of the development process. So I want to kind of debunk one thing. I don't want to debunk it. I just want to question. Michael's talking about a process, the development process takes between the design process, testing, prototyping, parts choice, more testing, tweaking, revisions, more testing, different parts, listening, tweaking, testing, listening, and so on. We're talking about a process that takes a minimum of months, sometimes a year, sometimes more. Now, I have something else to say here, completely different but related. I was once with a manufacturer. We were kind of visiting a few of his dealers and a couple of things where his products were installed. Couple of nice big home theaters. And we went to visit one of his dealers, and his dealers was showing us the system. And we both thought it sucked. Wasn't this guy's system, it's another brand. And we were both, and I'm kind of looking at him, he's kind of like, I'm kind of, and so And the Steelers like just enthralled with this stuff. And he's like showing us these cables, and he shows us like this RCA cable, and it's got like a little rubber grip thing around it. You know how some of them do on the barrels to help you pull them out. And he's like, this guy took 2 years finding just the right material for this. And so we're polite. We go on and we get in the car, and we got to drive to another town that's like, let's say 4 hours away or something.
Yeah.
We go and we're driving. He's like, all right, look, I just have to say, I could spend 2 years making this drive if I suck.
Yup.
Okay.
Oh, or if you're getting paid by the hour, and don't care when you get there. Yeah.
Okay, so it doesn't take that long. And believe me, I've worked with amp manufacturers too, and they do not sit there over and over and over. I mean, none of them I've encountered do this, and they kind of act like, oh my God, okay, we changed this one resistor. Now let's have 6 hours or hell, 6 days of listening tests where we sit there and stroke our chins and kind of ponder the effects of this resistor change.
Yeah.
I am 100% convinced that there are amp manufacturers who do that. I am even more convinced that almost none of them actually do, because they're professionals, right?
Yeah.
And they know better. And there may be some listening tests involved, but this whole notion of like voicing an amplifier is pretty bogus anyway.
Yeah.
If someone, you can go buy books that tell you how to voice speakers and tell you specifically how to change all the different components in there to voice a speaker, right? The Loudspeaker Design Cookbook, among others.
Yeah.
Go find me the book that says how to voice amps.
Well, that would be a really short book. Put a crappy power supply on it.
I've read a lot of the books, probably most of the major books on amp design. And there's really 2 things that you can really voice is like, you're probably going to have some kind of a high pass filter in there to prevent DC from coming in, right?
Mm-hmm.
That might be at 10 hertz or who knows what, right? Mm-hmm. And then you're probably on the voltage gain stage, the middle stage of a 3-stage amp, which most of them are 3-stage. In the feedback loop, which they have a feedback loop, by the way. Even if they say no feedback, it means no global feedback. There's still local feedback.
Yeah.
And so in that feedback loop, the feedback loop on that stage is basically a big, transistor to provide the gain, and then a capacitor in the feedback loop, and the capacitor passes high frequencies and blocks low frequencies, right? Mm-hmm. So, and it's out of phase, so that means it's canceled, right? So anything that goes through the high frequencies get canceled above a certain frequency. So that's a long-winded way of me saying it's a low-pass filter, and they low-pass it at 50 kilohertz or something like that, so the amp doesn't oscillate. Because if you don't have that, the amp will start oscillating at high frequencies, and it'll blow up real fast. So that's the only things I know of that you can really voice on an amp. And now, of course, with speakers, there's tons of stuff you can voice, but the people that are good at that don't need to take a year or even a month. Basically what they'll do is they will build a crossover, probably with some kind of a program. You can do the math yourself, but just use a program. They're going to build a crossover with some kind of program. You're going to run a measurement, see what it looks like. If it's not measuring too stupid, they'll listen to it. Yeah. Now, there are speaker manufacturers, who just start plugging parts in and just start listening. Mm-hmm. It may take them a lot longer, but if they're taking, like I said, if they're taking months to figure out how to voice a speaker, they suck.
Yeah.
Or they're just not focused enough on their job.
I think that really sort of points out one of the differences between product development cycles and product reviewing, which, Michael is trying to make that connection. But the thing about it is, most people who are developing products understand how those products work.
Right.
And most people who are reviewing the gear don't understand how it works. So like if I'm reviewing a component and I understand how that component works, then I understand what can cause it to not work as well. And I have music in a playlist somewhere that is going to find those problems, right?
Yeah.
And if it's a DAC, Well, there are only a few things that can make a DAC sound bad, and it's really comes down to the reconstruction filter. If it's an amp, it could be the power supply, it could be the output stage, or whatever. You know where those bugbears are. You've got a piece of music somewhere that is going to identify them, and so you might have to sit for 5 minutes and think, oh, well, this is an integrated amp. What are all the things I've got to go through to check and make sure nothing stupid is happening here? But no, you're going to have evaluated pretty quickly. And then what you've got to do is figure out substitute songs that do the same thing as your playlist songs do. So you're not using the same songs every review, because then readers write in and they get mad at you. You just used that song last week and whatever. So a lot of reviewing for me is just figuring out, okay, which song serves the same function as this other song that I've found that located a problem. So,
I mean, when I test speakers, right? If it's a normal, bookshelf speaker or something, right? I will put it on, kind of get a picture of the overall basic tonality, and then as soon as vocals come on, I move my head right and left, up and down. That way I can tell roughly what the dispersion of the speaker is. I can tell if they screwed the crossover up, right? Because you'll start to hear dispersion problems. I turn it up, which also tells you if they screwed the crossover up, because if it's too low and the tweeter can't handle it, you'll start to hear distortion from the tweeter. Or if the woofer sucks or something like that, you'll start to hear distortion down there. You'll start to hear chuffing or who knows what, right? I mean, I can go through this process in 5-10 minutes, maybe not that. I mean, when I've done consulting jobs, people didn't sit there and go, okay, we made this change. Now let's spend an hour. It's like you make the change and you spend 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And this is me. This is the engineers I've dealt with, all of them, all around the world.
Yeah.
It's like they listen for 5 minutes and they're like, okay, that worked.
Yeah.
We'll leave it there, or, this could stand improvement. I mean, I remember I did it, the longest voicing job I ever did was on a fairly complicated Bluetooth speaker, and it took a day. And it was also a speaker that, like a lot of Bluetooth speakers was, the drivers were being pushed to the edge of their limits, right? And we were trying to get the most out of that design. And, we kind of started from... They had a really bad voicing on it. It was done by some other dude. I said, no, okay, let's start with this. And we did that. And this is all in the DSP. So we didn't have to change any parts or anything, right? This is all just messing with the DSP. And we change this and that, run a measurement, listen, change, run a measurement, listen. And granted, it would take a little longer if you had passive components, but most of the speaker manufacturers I've seen, use some kind of a breadboard where they can just plug components in, or they switch different values of resistors or capacitors or whatever, right?
Yeah.
And these people should be professionals, and they should be able to go through this process pretty quickly. It doesn't take forever, and it shouldn't take you that long to determine if a product is worthy or not. You should be able to do this pretty quickly. And frankly, the listeners I've had in blind tests, they take 3 tunes to figure out a speaker, maybe 4.
Yeah.
And they might come back and compare a couple speakers with a different tune.
Yeah.
But it doesn't take them a long time to develop their preference. And I mean, I can think of a couple cases where, I've found further down the line a problem with a component that I, played a certain piece of music like, ooh, that doesn't work too good. And I could go back and compare, stuff like that. But, that could happen with anything. And you just lucked into finding a piece of music, or unlucked, whatever you want to call that, into finding a piece of music that didn't happen to work too well with that product. But whether or not your development process or the review process would stumble upon that, it's very questionable. And I just don't think that, I think the whole thing of like, oh, it takes, and believe me, there are manufacturers who'll sit there and go, I mean, they write on their website. I think I've actually written some copy for people about this, where they're like, oh yeah, rigorous listening test, rigorous, it's always rigorous. Like you're climbing a friggin' mountain or something. And And, it always tries to glamorize the process and make it into this mystical thing. But I don't know any engineers for whom it's a mystical thing.
No.
Maybe I've consulted with one. And it was pretty obvious to me that, like, there was a certain level of BS there. And in fact, in that particular case, I can't remember what his title, the guy who was like the business manager of the company is like, yeah, that's kind of his thing. He has to get all like fussy.
Yeah.
But, you could tell whether the thing worked or not pretty quick. I mean, I heard of one manufacturer whom I loved and respected doing tests with an amplifier and turning a piece of wire back and forth to see which way it sounded better. It's like, oh my God. But, whatever. I mean, it's there has to be this mystique.
Yeah.
And that's key to high-end audio. It's key to high-end audio reviewing because you have to kind of maintain that idea of the mystique.
Yeah, at one point he says, if I've learned one thing from writing reviews as a full-time job for 13 years or so, it's this. We may think we know the sound of, quote unquote, the best, but there's always something out there that sounds better, even if we can't imagine what that better sounds like. I'd like to sit down with Michael and unpack that because what does that mean? I mean, okay, if you're talking about transducers, until we literally design a perfect transducer, maybe, but with regard to electronics, and then he says, what's more, some gear sounds so different from our norm that it takes real time just to get acquainted and understand how these differences affect our ongoing musical engagement. Well, no, it's just the more time you spend with it, the more time you get used to it. The more time these radical differences don't bother you. But it doesn't make them good.
I mean, that happens to me all the time. I put on, especially like with headphones, you put them on and you're like, what the hell is that? Just because what you were listening to before was different. But after I think I asked Sean Olive about this and I said, how long does it take to adjust? He's like, oh, it's like 30 seconds.
Yeah. Yeah.
But, Michael talks about, how it affects our engagement with the music, which I'm kind of like, You know what affects my engagement with the music? Well, all
Hot
sorts
gummies?
of stuff. No, definitely not. Although if that's your thing, that's fine. The music. And, I'll probably be a little more engaged if I'm on a better system versus a $100 Bluetooth speaker.
Yeah.
But, what engages me with the music is the musician's creativity and, the sound of the recording, which comes through on, which, you don't need a $bazillion system or anything to suss out the sound of a recording. And, it may be fun to sit here and say, well, it takes me months to decide if I like a component. But you're saying, it's just a matter of you're getting used to it.
Yeah.
And you can't really trust that. I don't think. Although he does say at the end, a review written after a single day of listening could be swayed by a bad ham sandwich. Well,
see, that's why I don't eat ham.
A review, that's the problem right there. A review could be swayed by you having a bad ham sandwich. Bad ham sandwich. On that day you wrote their review.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Even if you've spent months listening. Yeah. I mean, bad sandwiches can strike at any time, dude.
I mean, look, these things are swayed. Our impressions of these things are swayed by our emotions. And that's one of the reasons I like measurements in so many cases, is because, it's not influenced by your mood. And, it is some sort of objectivity. And granted, it's, does it tell us what our reaction to an amp is? No. Does it tell us what our reaction to a speaker is? Well, it's pretty predictive.
Yeah.
And same with headphones. Does it tell us what our reaction to, what am I thinking here? I lost my train of thought.
That must mean that it's my turn to edit.
Oh, it's definitely your turn to edit.
Okay. Yeah, you get a lot more rambly when it's my turn.
I do, don't I? I forgot about this. Good. I'm glad you noticed that. Okay.
Anyway, you ready to go get a drink of water and take a break for a minute? Or you got anything else to say about this one?
I have nothing else to say, but we welcome everyone's feedback on this. And, if you go to a hi-fi show and something sounds crappy, maybe it sounds crappy. Or maybe it sounds good.
Or maybe it was just a bad ham sandwich.
Maybe it was just a bad ham sandwich. So, yeah.
All right, buddy. Let's take a break. Right. We'll be back in a minute. Let's do this.
And we're back. I'm Brent.
I'm Dennis.
This is Audio
Unleashed.
And we are going to talk now about Tidal. Tidal is a streaming service. And it was famous for having better than CD quality audio, arguably. It was famous for Jay-Z at some point owning it. We really should do a Google search so that we don't get someone correcting us on this. I think I'll start Google searching my phone right now just to see if I'll get on Wikipedia and see if Jay-Z still owns Tidal. But anyway, so there were two articles that appeared on Tech Hive, noted tech site. I don't think they do a ton of audio coverage, but some. And one of them is titled "So Long Samsung." Tidal drops support for Samsung TVs. And it had already yanked its support for Amazon Fire TV and Roku devices. And then the other one was "End of an Era, Tidal to drop last remaining MQA tracks." These are both by a guy named Ben Patterson, who's a senior writer there. So Tidal, it was about a year ago that Tidal started putting FLAC, free lossless audio codec, on files instead of MQA. And MQA, for those few who might not know, it's a very, very controversial audio format that emerged, I don't remember, 10 years ago or something.
Yeah.
Don't correct us, people. Whatever. I could look it up, but I choose not to.
Jazz.
Right. Close enough.
Who cares if it's a wrong note? So, by the way, I just found out. No, there was a Reddit post. Someone said a reminder that Jay-Z sold Tidal to Jack Dorsey, founder of Twitter, in 2021. And looking at Wikipedia, yes, Tidal is now majority owned by Block Inc., an American payment processing company that's owned by Jack Dorsey and Jim McKelvey. So. Yeah.
Oh, that's like Square, right? So,
yeah,
because Jack Dorsey started or led or something Square. So Jack Dorsey, Twitter founder, whatever, dude with a big beard.
I clicked on the link. Block Inc., formerly Square Inc. Yeah. Dang. Okay, look at you with the knowledge.
I'm totally plugged into the tech scene, man. This is why I make the billions. So anyway. About a year ago, they kind of, with all the controversy about MQA, which we could go into, maybe we will do that at some point, just for kicks.
Well, we just talked about it last episode,
It was so much fun. But anyway, with all the controversy, Tidal started pulling MQA off its servers and started switching over to FLAC, which is, I think, basically what everybody else is using for high-res audio. Is that right?
It's what Qobuz is using. I think Apple's using ALAC.
Okay, so similar.
Yeah.
Functionally the same, but they don't have to, it's proprietary. Anyway, so, and that basically cuts the file size roughly in half, right? So MQA was, kind of high. It was high. It handled high-res files, but it actually reduced a lot of the data and all that. So a lot of people didn't like it, and they said it introduced other problems. So Tidal's getting rid of MQA completely and switching completely over to FLAC. Now, Tidal's also dropping support for various devices. Now, I am not an expert on the streaming business. I know a little bit about it, though. I consulted for a company that was the precursor to Roku TV. And so I have some kind of a little bit of knowledge in here. And so my understanding of this is that they actually have to pay to be on all these different platforms, right? Because otherwise, why wouldn't you? You're just getting traffic, right? If you're on Samsung TVs. But they've probably looked at this and said, well, we're not getting enough traffic on Samsung TVs to justify whatever we're paying Samsung. And, when you buy a remote from a whatever TV, Sony TV or something, and you see a dedicated Netflix button or something like that, well, Netflix is paying Sony to put that on there.
Oh, yeah.
It's not just like Sony's going, oh, we think this is the best, or we think our customers really want this. Now, there may be I have to say, there may be an element of that, because since Netflix is the dominant streaming service, if your Sony TV doesn't have a Netflix button on the remote and Samsung does, you're going to look pretty bad. So I don't know. I don't know which direction the leverage goes on that, but in this case,
I don't know.
You have to say Tidal was paying these people and it wasn't getting enough traffic, so it pulled it. But I have to say, Dennis, you are perhaps a little more plugged into this stuff than I am. Why would you have Tidal now?
Oh, wow. I wouldn't. But it is a good question. Tidal just dropped their prices from $20 to $10, something like that. Yeah, what does Tidal offer? I've heard people try to make the case for it, like, oh, they've got certain classical tunes that Qobuz doesn't have. Maybe. I don't know. But it's really, really hard to make the case. I tell you, though, here's what I almost wonder. Just admitting straight up front, I don't know why they're doing this. And I think, actually, now that you've said it, this is costing them money and not really making them money hypothesis is probably the truest thing. But I almost wonder if Tidal is about to try to make a big change. And they're just trying to determine which platforms do we want to develop for. Because, Samsung TVs are famous for using a proprietary operating system. Well, it's Tizen. It's a Linux-based system, but Samsung's the only one that uses it, right? Whereas Sony uses Android, which, if an app is on an Android phone, it's on, Android smart TVs. Same with, NVIDIA Shield. And a lot of other companies use Roku, right? But Tidal's already dropped Roku support. So I almost just wonder if they're about to make some drastic change and they're just like trying to figure out, okay, to do that, we're going to have to redo all of our apps. Where does that investment make the most sense right now? I don't know. I'm just completely stepping in the dark here, but otherwise, it just, I think, though, you would be smart to look at this and go, ooh, things aren't going well for Tidal.
Yeah, but I don't know. What change could they make? That anybody would notice or care about? Spotify has been talking about going to a high-res tier for years now, and it just started talking about it again. And frankly, nobody hardly cared that it didn't. Yeah. And nobody's really going to care that it does. Apple has a high-res tier, and I don't think anybody but audiophiles noticed. Apple has an Atmos tier. I don't think most people are really listening to that, except maybe by accident.
I think at this point, Tidal is sticking around purely through virtue of tribalism. So I think there are a lot of people for whom subscribing to Tidal is part of their identity, But
wouldn't they subscribe to Qobuz instead?
They could. Probably, but they're already in the Tidal camp, and maybe there's some turf, man. Maybe there's beef between Tidal people and Qobuz people. I don't know. Maybe it's like Crips versus Bloods. You get the red bandana if you're for Tidal.
Dude, come on, that's a dated reference. It's so easy. It's Kendrick Lamar versus Drake. That's the beef thing now.
Oh, that's a good point. I'm not as hip as you, man.
That's what put beef on the map.
Anyway, that's my best guess. I don't know why else would people be sticking around with Tidal. Like you said, what's the point? Why does Tidal exist anymore? Inertia. That's my best answer. So
I mean, a lot of audiophiles jumped to it because they had
Mm-hmm.
MQA, and that was perceived as being better than, MP3 or Ogg Vorbis or whatever the other streaming services were. AAC on Apple, Ogg Vorbis on Spotify, and whatever on whatever. Right?
We should explain for normies, like one of the big supposed benefits of MQA was a big bugbear for a lot of audiophiles, time domain stuff. They claimed that it removed smearing, right?
Yeah.
And so that's, I think, why a lot of audiophiles were like, ooh, MQA, no time smearing. And so they've just decided that that's valid, and maybe they hitched their horses to Tidal because of that, and now they kind of don't care anymore. I don't know, man.
I'm told, though, that if you put the green pin around your CD, that also gets rid of time smear.
How do you do that with Tidal? Do you draw a green ring around your screen?
Oh,
Maybe?
you take the green thing, right, and you color around your USB cable. It goes to your DAC.
Yes.
It works. Have you tried it? Have you listened to it, Dennis?
No.
See,
because
how do you know? How do you know if you haven't listened to it?
I use Wi-Fi, man. So I have to paint green circles around the top of my router.
You need to make like some little green rings, right? Like little green, like little tiny hula hoops that the signal could pass through between your router and your whatever.
Huh. Okay.
The signal can pass through that.
So at this point, we're just giving Ted Denney free ideas?
I was just about to say that. There you go.
Man.
Special. So if Ted's listening, which I'm sure he's not, for a modest licensing fee, you can have that. You can even put the Audio Unleashed logo on it. And we will personally, if you fly us to the Munich show, we will personally demo it. But we can't guarantee we'll keep a straight face. That's the only caveat.
I can guarantee we won't. Oh, man. Let's go talk about Rick Beato, buddy.
Let's do it. We'll be right back. Dennis.
Yes, sir.
What is the real reason why music is getting worse?
Dang, that was a good segue.
Did I spoil your intro? Weren't you supposed to intro this?
That's okay.
We can
Why don't
run
you
with
take this
jazz,
one,
man. Jazz.
Yeah, jazz, baby. So the real reason that music is getting worse, apparently, is because it's too easy to make and it's too accessible. There you go. Segment over. Yeah. Let's go.
I guess we're all done.
We are. Credits. No. Let's dig into this a little bit. So what we're talking about is the most recent video from Mr. Rick Beato. Well, it's the most recent as we're recording this. It was, he posted this on June 25th, 2024. The real reason why music is getting worse. And I think he makes a really good case for what I just said. You know, the one thing that I thought was really the most revelatory about this piece, and the thing that surprised me the most, is when he pointed out why the major labels lost interest in rock and wanted to stop producing rock music, you know?
And why was that?
Just because it's so hard to produce and so costly, you know, you need studio time and things like that. And he was like, it's way easier for the record labels to focus on music that people can produce in their bedrooms, and you can't really record real rock and roll in your bedroom, you know?
It's tough.
At least not, you know, in a polished sort of mass-produced, you know, music industry kind of way. And I was like, wow, that's eye-opening. But yeah, I mean, he sort of walks through the decades and talks about back when he was a kid. And, this is something that you've said before, that, records were precious because you couldn't afford a lot of them. And you had your collection and you listened to it a lot and you got to know it. And these days, there's just so much. I've got a perfect example of that. I was having a long conversation with our dear mutual friend, Lauren Dragon, headphone specialist from Wirecutter this weekend. And she turned me on to this great band called The Last Dinner Party. And you know how I know the name of that band? Because I Googled it and I'm looking it up right now. Because every time I close it, I forget what they're called because it's just one of a billion streams on Apple Music.
Yeah.
And I even saved it to my library and I still can't find the damn thing. So he's got a good point. And this is a band that I immediately connected with. And I'm like, yeah, I want to listen to more. And it's just I can't remember their name because there's just so much freaking noise. So yeah, there's a thing that people often talk about, the paradox of choice. And, when we've got so many freaking options, it's hard to choose. And I think that's why a lot of people are just kind of listening to whatever. Just start up their app, press play, and whatever comes next, man, that's what comes next.
Well, I know, but there can be so little effort involved. Okay, I got a great example. I was listening yesterday. I was driving from St. Marie's, Idaho, up to Kellogg, Idaho, where I was going to start riding my recumbent tricycle on the Trail of the Coeur d'Alenes. Highly recommended. And
Nice.
I was listening to a Mark Maron interview with Rodney Crowell, famous, country performer and songwriter, probably better known as a songwriter. And he was talking about, they were talking about Waylon Jennings, artist who I was aware of his existence. I kind of know who he is, but I couldn't have named a Waylon Jennings song.
You couldn't have named Lukenbach, Texas?
I thought Willie wrote that.
Oh, but he sang it, famously. Or sang on it with Willie.
Whatever.
But, yeah,
they're kind of the same person. But anyway... Anyway, they both begin with W. They're both from Texas, right? And they both kind of perform in the same genre, and they've shared many an album together. Anyway, so he was talking about Mark Maron or Rodney Crowell. One of the two of them was talking about Waylon Jennings and how he evolved from whatever to whatever. I don't know country music very well, but I do like older country music, and I also like Dwight Yoakam and Steve Earle and guys who kind of keep it real. I hate if you turn on country music radio, I think it's just wretched. But
yeah,
anyway,
bro country ruined everything. But yeah. Waylon famously belonged to the outlaw country movement. That's what he's most known for.
Yeah. And so Mark Maron was saying he really kind of turned the corner around that album this time. And, Rodney Crowell agrees, it's some heavy stuff. That's great. And I'm like, I could listen to that. So I downloaded it, even though I was kind of out in the sticks. It took a while to download because my cell service was flickering. But I did download it. I listened to it yesterday. I'm like, well, it's a good album. And it kind of made me think I should probably listen to some more Waylon Jennings.
Yeah.
And, so there's that giant plus of I've heard so much stuff that I never had time or money to check out, or I never had money to check out when I was a kid. And I never had time. There's so many artists in the streaming era that I've gotten to explore in much greater depth than I ever would have before. And that's got to be a big plus. So if you're paralyzed by your choices, I think it doesn't take that much effort to go subscribe to a magazine. If you're jazz, you can subscribe to Downbeat or something, right? And you can look in the review section and go, oh, that sounds cool. That sounds dumb. That sounds cool. Whatever, right? At least you're hip to the new releases. You can go through, you can find stuff. And you're not going to spend as much time with the new Emmanuel Wilkins album as you probably did with the Stanley Turrentine album that came out in 1975. But, at least you can listen to it. You got stuff. And, I was listening to actually him the other day and I was kind of like, oh, this is pretty good. And, so I don't spend as much time with those artists as I would have back in the day when I listened to nothing but Rush, All the World's a Stage for 6 months because I really couldn't afford anything more. Although I loved it too, but whatever. So it's just kind of different. But I do think that, we don't engage with music the way we used to. A lot more of it is background. And I also wanted to talk about the making of music because this is what really sticks with me as a musician and someone who's currently within sight of finishing his second album.
Before you get to that, real quick, could I just recommend a really good music magazine?
Please.
You're going to laugh. It's the magazine built into Qobuz. I think it is one of the best music magazines out there right now.
I didn't know there was one.
Legitimately, if you've got the app, open the app. I think the second tab is just called Magazine.
I'm doing it right now.
Pretty good. I mean, it's like I've actually discovered artists through that I enjoy listening to.
Oh, Magazine right there. It's got a little thing with like a book. Look at this thing.
It's decent, man. It's really decent.
Maybe I'll take a look at that. That's cool.
I'm sorry to interrupt.
That's fine. I'm glad you did because I didn't know that was there. So but in terms of making music, though, I agreed 100% with what he said because people talk about AI taking over music, but in so many ways it already has. Because if you listen to all these different artists now, so much of it is with a drum machine, so much of it is with MIDI. So much of the personal expression that you have with a sax player, guitar player, or drummer is lost. And in fact, as Rick Beato points out, he's like, there's no point in recording drums anymore because people just replace them with samples anyway. And that is true. I'm told by my studio buddies who are actually in like real studios in LA. And you were talking about, whether you can make a rock record in your bedroom. In something approaching the traditional way in which, you mic to the drums and look, you kind of can. The drums are the problem. The guitar amp, you shove a Shure SM57 up into the amp.
Yeah.
And you're kind of there. And, if you have a bass, you're probably going to plug that in direct anyway. Or you can mic the amp, right? If you have a vocalist, well, you have a microphone. And,
look, the White Stripes made some of the best rock music of the past 50 years in their living room. So, it can be done, right?
The problem is the drums. And the problem is if you record drums in a bedroom, if you can somehow make room for the drums, it's going to sound like a little teeny tiny room. And I don't know of a way to get around that. You can actually run through a de-reverb app, which I have one and it works great. But you can go through that and take the room noise out and then put your own reverb into it. Which you can. It might sound kind of okay, but it'd be better if you get a decent space to do it in. Yeah. And, that's the hard part. But still, it could be done.
Sure.
I've done it. I've done some pretty decent rock recordings. You find spaces. I went up to, I remember one time, like 20 years ago, I was working with a folk guitar player, singer named George Stass, great guy, and really talented. And so I was playing bass, of course, and he played guitar and he sang. And we needed drums. And so I had a friend, a really, really, really good jazz drummer friend. And I said, hey, but he's also like great rock drummer. And I said, hey, can we record some drums for this? He's like, yeah, sure. But you got to come up to I got a space up in Bridgeport. This is Connecticut. I was living in New York. And he's like, sure, just come on up there. And so I think we went up to his place and he drove us up there and we recorded the drums and I had maybe 5 microphones. And I recorded it into, I think I ran it into an ADAT, the old 8-track recorders they had that were based on SVHS tape. But now you can just go buy an interface for $500 for a 8-channel interface, whatever they cost, $400, $500. And plug your mics into there, and you don't necessarily. Rick Beato himself talks a lot about the Glenn Johns 3 microphone technique they used on the early Led Zeppelin stuff.
Yep.
And let's face it, okay microphones, pretty decent microphones can be $100 these days. So for $1,000 all in, maybe with your interface, your mics, your cables, and mic stands and all that stuff, you can do a good drum recording if you have some kind of a space. And maybe you could even get your garage sounding decent, or it's possible, but still. It doesn't, there's so many recording, Springsteen, apparently they just spent a tremendous amount of time getting the drum sound and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And that's where records start to cost a lot of money.
And I think the point that he was making is, rock is dead is the most common musical refrain that I've heard over the past 30 years, right? But I think the point that he's making is that, well, the whole rock is dead movement was really sort of orchestrated by the music labels, right? Because they didn't want to deal with rock anymore because it cost them too much money to produce rock, right? Yeah, I mean, it can be done, but if we've got an entire machine that is the predominant way that people get their music, and the people controlling that machine have an agenda, then that agenda is going to influence a lot of people in the way they interact with music. So that resonated with me. I mean, it's just, it's about inertia and it's about trends. It can be done, but it is getting harder and harder to do. And that makes it less likely. That's the point.
And it's kind of similar to the way we were talking about how Spotify is trying to steer people into AI-generated music that it doesn't have to really pay for. I guess it's a lot of that. But, at least we do have the capacity to record music. And any rock band that wants to make an album now can make an album. And it's not that hard. And, hey, look, if you have to use drum samples or use an electronic drum kit or whatever, you do it. It's not the end of the world, especially since all the other instruments and the vocals can be real. And you can overdub, percussion and cymbals. I mean, with my album that's coming out, I used a real drummer, which I actually completely forgot about that option because you can go on Fiverr, Fiverr.com, and literally hire people from all around the world who are really good, who will do a recording for you for maybe $40 on a track. And the guy I use sends me, how many tracks does he send me? Oh, like 7 or 8 tracks, which is more than I can competently mix. And a couple times I just use the MP3 stereo mix that he sends me because I'm like, I can't mix it as good as he did. But it's fine. And I think on one track, I had a drum machine, a really good drum machine called Borsta, which is on iPad. And the sounds are great. And I just basically used it kind of as a timekeeper, and we overdub percussion on top of that, which is all mic'd, real percussion. And it sounds good. It doesn't sound mechanical. It's like, there are ways around this. It's just that the record companies don't want to fool with that. And
let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
One of the biggest revelations that we discussed in the previous episode is that there are really only 3 labels left, right? Major labels. Do you think this is going to contribute to the declining relevance of the major labels?
Oh, boy. I literally said that 28 years ago. I wrote that in Home Theater Magazine because, the Audible player came out. And, Audible came out before MP3 players did. But not by much. And you could download stuff on Audible, and it was, I'm sure, really heavily compressed MP3, but it's fine for just spoken word. And I was kind of like, well, this is obviously the direction that the music industry is going to go in. Well, which it was for a long time. And, and then like a year later, they came out with the first MP3 players from, I want to say, Diamond Multimedia. And they sucked.
That sounds right.
Because they had like 2 albums. And I bought one. I just bought one. And they were like $100-something. And I put 2 albums on it. I'm kind of like, this is stupid. And I think I just ended up putting some test tones on there and leaving it at that and using it for like a pink noise generator. But, then the iPod came out and all of a sudden it worked. So I said a long time, the record companies, this is it. It's over. We don't need you anymore. And I was half right and half wrong in that we don't need them anymore. However, if you want to be Britney Spears or Beyonce or Ed Sheeran or The Weeknd, you have to have a record label behind you to get that kind of exposure. Because, they do not, as I learned when I did my first album, you can't just like send an album to people through whatever means. And have them, they won't even look at it, right? And since I have a cousin who used to work at his campus radio station at LSU, Louisiana State University, my cousin Greg, and he's like, and I just mentioned this to him a few weeks ago when I was down in New Orleans, and he's like, Oh yeah. He's like, no, we didn't. We never even like remotely thought about listening to stuff that came in over the transom. But we didn't even listen to stuff unless it came from a PR company.
Wow.
He's like, you have a limited amount of time, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
And at least if it's coming from a PR company, it's not going to be a disaster. It's going to be something kind of listenable. It's not going to be like, ooh, and it's not going to be inept.
Right. Right.
So, you still need, when we finish our album, we're going to pay probably somebody to promote it in some fashion. We haven't figured out what yet, and to really get it seriously promoted. And we're just jazz, right? We're dealing with 30 or 40 stations nationwide. And, I don't know how many playlists, and, maybe we can get it reviewed. And, one of my buddies got reviewed in Downbeat. You can get it done, but you got to spend money, and to get exposure on a nationwide basis with a major pop act, you're talking about probably $100,000, I would guess, to start.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just for the promo alone. That's not the cost of the album or anything. That's just to get it reviewed, just to get it played on the radio, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, how many companies are successful in pitching you on getting you to review their product if it doesn't come from a PR person, right? Not many.
That's true. Yeah.
I mean, I take pitches directly from companies.
Of course.
And if somebody pitches me some kind of a speaker, I will look at it. I will look at the email and go, oh, or really any kind of audio product. I will at least look at the email. But, if it's a Me Too product from some brand I've never heard of, I probably won't touch it. If it's a Me Too product from Sony, I'll look a little harder at it.
Yeah.
I might still not do anything with it, but at least it gets attention. And, or if it's a product from some PR person I know, I'm absolutely going to answer open the email, probably answer it. So
let's translate that into music discovery then. So other than reading magazines and you listening to the stuff that I like so you can make fun of me for liking it, how do you discover new stuff to listen to?
Well, it's just random. I mean, I did read Downbeat, but I let my subscription lapse because I got tired of it. And Jazz Times is sadly no more. I haven't figured out what my jazz discovery mechanism is going to be. I'll probably just find some website. And with other stuff, honestly, it's kind of like a whole bunch of different sources. I might, every year at Christmas time, I'd find lists of top X number of jazz recordings this year, top 20 jazz recordings of the year. I listen to all of them. And I find a lot of stuff that way. And then I start following those artists. Or it could be something like, listening to Mark Maron, and he mentions somebody. And, he's got pretty good taste in music. He doesn't rave about the Eagles. So, I tend to not hate the things he likes. And so that's somebody I can listen to. There's just all sorts of random ways. I might see a concert that's advertised here locally, and I might go like, oh, who's that? And I might find him and listen to something and go like, oh, I like that. Or who knows what.
But I think though with my dad, I don't know why my dad is always my point of reference for this kind of stuff, but the way my dad discovers new music is whatever Apple Music plays next. And he has no idea who it is. I think I mentioned this on a previous episode. I got in the truck with my dad once and he was listening to Billy Strings. And I was like, oh, hell yeah. You like Billy Strings too? And he was like, who's that? It's just, he had no clue. And so none of it sticks. And he's not developing new favorites. And he's constantly being subjected or, exposed to new music, but none of it sticks. None of it remains in his consciousness. And I have to think he's probably more typical than you are, Bubba.
Well, I'm pretty sure about that.
So I think for most people, music is getting worse because what's being forced down their throats is worse. But, like somebody said on a comment on our Patreon a few months back, there's more amazing music being made right now than ever before. If you know how to look for it and know how to find it, this is a golden age for music, man. But
I'm not sure about that.
man, I don't know. Some of the stuff that I'm listening to is like some of my favorite music of my life, man. So it's just hard to find. It's just, no Spotify algorithm is exposing anybody to King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard, right? I mean, but
I guess I'll have to resubscribe to Spotify now.
But they're one of the biggest rock bands out right now, and they're selling out. I would
never have heard of them if it wasn't for you.
Well, see, there you go. And like, look, that I saw in their newsletter that they're doing a North American tour, and I was like, heck yeah, are they playing the Fox? Click. Oh, it's already sold out. So, yeah, they're pretty big.
Okay, but I don't think. Here's what I think there's an issue. And that's that there's kind of too much music education. And there's like certainly in jazz, which I can speak intelligently about. Mm-hmm. You don't hear a lot of really individual sounding artists. And, I guess maybe the time has passed for real innovation in that genre. And yeah, I know people, you can tell me that so-and-so, blah, blah, person is innovating and blah, blah. But for the most part, not. And, you listen to singer-songwriter stuff, which I also listen to some of that. I'm not, here's what I have a theory. You want to hear it?
Sure, always.
All right. I really think that with mass communications happening after World War II, international mass communications, where all of a sudden people in one part of the world could watch TV or, from other parts of the world. I mean, granted, limited doses, but you could. Yeah. And start to hear music from other parts of the world. And yeah, it took a long time, but the very limited influx of blues records into England around 1960, even though they were very rare, just had this colossal effect on music. Colossal. Mm-hmm. And we're still feeling the effects of that decades later. What would be the equivalent of that now? I mean, look, we've all heard there's no kind of music we haven't heard unless, maybe somebody hasn't heard a lot of gamelan or something. I have. But what's going to be the cross-cultural fire that's ignited by something like that? I really think there was a golden era when you had all these cultures that were before that were isolated, and now they could come together because of mass communications. And now what's going to happen?
So, Rick Beato's video is broken down into two acts. Act one, music is too easy to make. Act two, music is too easy to consume. Would you say that you would add act three to that? The world is too small?
Yes, absolutely.
That's really insightful, dude.
I'm not going to say it's too small, but it's gotten a lot smaller, and those barriers that came down, it was the dropping of all those barriers 50, 60 years ago that really inspired all the great music that happened, I think, in the 60s and 70s. And
I've got an example that's going to make you hate me, but it's, Jerry Garcia was sort of obsessed with Bulgarian choirs, and he would import a lot of records, Bulgarian vocal groups. And there was one specific choral piece that he listened to, and it sort of so pervaded his consciousness that the melody from it ended up working its way into Darkstar one night. And then he ended up loving that so much that melody then transformed into the entire melodic backbone of Uncle John's band. So, the lineage of Uncle John's band is Bulgarian vocal or choral music, sort of finding its way into this weird spacey modal jam and then becoming a piece of Americana by the Grateful Dead. But yeah, there's not a whole lot of avenues for that these days because none of that is exotic anymore. None of it is weird. It's just in the ether, I guess.
And when you think about like the grunge movement, right? Well, that was a collapsing of the wall between punk and metal, right?
Yeah. And pop.
Yeah. And so that happened. But what walls can collapse now? I mean, the walls between hip hop and metal, that one collapsed, sadly. That's one that should have stayed up. And the wall between hip hop and country finally collapsed, and that's another one that should have stayed up. Yeah, hip hop may be fine on its own, but it doesn't seem to really blend super well with certain other genres. Yeah, it kind of just tends to make them embarrassing and bad.
Yeah. Or they make it bad. Yeah.
They make it bad. Somehow it's just not clicking. But yeah, so it's like the world is a lot smaller. And I don't know if there's going to be another Nirvana, you know. I think we might not see another Nirvana until we see another Ice Age, which we're not going to see.
Yeah.
So,
well, I think that's a perfectly uplifting point to end the episode on and do some credits. What do you think?
I forgot though. The next album by either Take Two or Siger and Butterworth, whatever we decide to call it, that will be the final dropping of all the walls between all genres. And after that, then it all comes to an end. That's our, there you go. Hey, you've got the album title now, The Ice Age. So. Well, I think we've already established that I'm editing this one. You are? Yes, sorry. I don't think we're going to have any new music this episode, so I'll just dredge up some cool
I don't have time right now.
I got
Butterburger house band
piles
tracks.
Of work to do and stuff.
Yeah. So, anybody else we need to credit?
Jeff Morrison for sending in a correction. What did he correct? Australian accents.
Yeah, he let me know very promptly that there are many different Australian accents that I am incorrect. So okay, good. Well, he's actually been there and we haven't. So that's true. Oh, and thanks to Lauren for turning me on to the Last Dinner Party because they're freaking cool as heck. There we go. Yeah. Okay. So everybody, we'll see you in a couple of weeks. Patrons, stick around. We got one more for you. Bye, everybody. Bye. Hey, thanks for sticking around to the end. If you liked what you heard and wish there'd been a little bit more of it, we got some good news for you. Indeed, we do. If you check out patreon.com/Audio Unleashed, all one word, you can get new episodes a little earlier than everybody else. And sometimes it's like a day or two early. Sometimes it's nearly a week. We never really know until we start editing. But the big plus is that you get extended cuts of every episode. And usually that's going to mean a whole extra segment that's about maybe a geekier topic or something that's a little more personal to us or something that's just going to really appeal to the hardcore Audio Unleashed listener. Yeah, what it boils down to is if you're somebody who would support Audio Unleashed on Patreon, we're going to make sure the bonuses to every episode are really aimed straight at your interests. Yeah, and so if you want to hear these segments, you can subscribe to our Patreon for $3 a month, which is less than I spend every single day on my cup of coffee when I go to Starbucks to write my boring articles. Yeah. One more time with that URL, that's patreon.com/Audio Unleashed. Or Audio Unleashed. Yeah. Thanks. Thanks, everybody.